For modelling tasks, selecting loops and rings of edges, and loops of points and primitives is something which we do frequently. So over these next few lessons, we'll see how we do that directly in the viewport. In this lesson, we're going to focus specifically on selecting rings and loops of edges. So I'll switch to the Select tool by tapping the S key, and Edge Selection by tapping the 3 key. To select an edge loop, we simply double left click on the edge, and that selects the whole loop. Or we can hold down the A key and middle click on an edge to select the whole edge loop that way. And rather than clicking, we can also just middle mouse drag across an edge with the A key held down to select the loop that way. To select an edge ring, we double middle click on the edge and that selects the whole ring. In Houdini versions prior to 19.5, we used to be able to select full loops and rings of edges by selecting a single edge and then holding down the A key and middle clicking on a second edge. That used to select the full loop or the full ring, but now in Houdini 19.5 it only selects the loop or ring in a single direction. The direction of the selection is determined by the second edge that we select. So if I select a single edge again, and this time I'll make a ring selection, so I'll hold down the A key and middle click on an edge on this side, and we see that the selection extends to the boundary of the geometry in this direction. And if I select another edge and hold down the A key and middle click on an edge on this side of it, the selection extends to the boundary in this direction. We can use this technique of selecting an edge and then holding down the A key and middle clicking on a second edge to select a full ring around the circumference of the tube because the geometry is continuous in this direction. The selection's still only grown in a single direction, but it ends up looping back around on itself, so the full ring gets selected. Now, rather than selecting an edge and then holding down the A key and middle clicking on the second edge, we can also select edge rings by just holding down the A key and middle mouse dragging across two edges to select the whole loop in a single direction that way. We can select multiple loops and rings by holding down the Shift key. So if I hold down Shift and the A key and middle drag across these edges, I keep adding edge loops to my selection. And if I keep holding down Shift A and drag across two edges in a ring direction, I can add those edge rings to my selection. If we want to remove a loop or a ring from the selection, then we can just release the Shift key and hold down the Control key together with the A key, and then middle mouse drag across a loop or a ring. So we can use this technique of holding down the A key and the Shift key and dragging across the edges to select a whole ring which runs between the boundaries of the geometry. We can hold down the A key and middle drag across two edges in one direction, and then also hold down the Shift key and the A key and drag across the edges in the opposite direction. So there are two main ways of selecting rings and loops of primitives. One is to double left click on an edge to select an edge loop, and double middle click on an edge to select an edge ring. The other method is to use the A key in combination with the middle mouse drag or click. If I'm using a mouse, I'll typically double click on an edge to select a full loop, but for some reason I find middle clicking awkward. So for edge ring selection, I'll typically use the A key and middle click or drag method. When I'm using a tablet, I find both double middle clicking and double left clicking difficult. So in that situation, I'll always use the A key plus middle mouse combinations for selecting both loops and rings of edges.